Mark, many of those games, he changes his shot. He would go to the foul line.
I think sometimes Pete got bored. Mm-hmm. You know, but you could see his foul shot change from sophomore to senior year. But he's always experimenting.
Yeah, it looked like an experimentation.
Pete, as you know, Pete's still shooting set shots. You know, some of those, you know, we haven't touched on this. He scores 44 points a game without a three-point shot, mind you. And some of those shots he's taking, and you could see it in the videos. You know, he takes these set shots from distances that really should be like four-pointers. Mm-hmm. You know, but there's such a wide variety of shots he's practiced. I don't think he thinks anything of putting them into practice in a game, of doing them in a game.
I know that when I was with him, he even tried underhand free throws.
Right.
As an experimentation.
Try behind the back free throws.
I'm surprised he didn't either. And in his junior year, the team was marginally successful.
They're a 500 team.
Press started to put him on the road. But Pete continued to score.
Showing off your star came at a great price. You know, the team started off well, but there was a certain amount of dissension, and you can't sustain a winning basketball team on just one guy. You know, Pete's senior year, they do have a much more talented supporting cast. They have two accomplished, talented big men in Apple Sanders and Danny Hester. And they finished the regular season at 20-8. Now, they go to the NIT, which is really still a big deal. The NCAA tournament was still a 32-team tournament, and you had to, you know, there were no at-large bids. So going to the NIT was really still a big deal. Plus, they were going to what press considered the basketball capital of the world. They were going to New York City. They were going to Madison Square Garden. And, you know, press doesn't, unlike most fathers and certainly most coaches, you know, press doesn't tamp down the expectations. He incites them. You know, he had been quoted before saying, "There's more pressure on my kid than anyone in America." And before they head into New York, they say, you know, he's asked by columnists at the New York Post, "What about your kid? What do you think?" He goes, "I think he's the best damn basketball player I've ever seen." You tell me what dad or what coach is going to say that about his son or his star player.
He created him. So Mark, Press and Pete are in the most hallowed grounds for basketball, New York City.
The NIT was supposed to be the ultimate demonstration of Press's brilliance as a coach. You know, the gift he was going to give to the basketball world, Pete. Instead, what you begin to see is Pete getting crushed under the weight of expectations. The media coverage is intense in a way that, you know, he's never seen in Baton Rouge. It begins with Lou Carnesecca, you know, saying he's better than Oscar Robertson and Jerry West. There's all sorts of talk about his contract, his, you know, pro contract that he's about to sign. You know, will he make $2 million? These are unheard of numbers. You know, it's clear that basketball is part of the television business now. That, you know, the television needs Pistol Pete. They need a great white hope.
Well, they showed that in the collegiate game when he played Kentucky on national television.
Well, the Kentucky game is televised on 206 stations, more than saw the previous year's showdown between Kareem and Elvin Hayes. You know, so it was clear that Pete was a hot television property. And the NBA, going into the 70s, was going to be, hopefully, driven by television. It's a television business. That's what that's what the example of football had taught everybody.
So now he's in New York under the glare of the hottest lights he's ever been under. He's
And
got,
it
the
begins
score,
to
he's
crack.
got the scoring record, too, that they're talking about.
He set the scoring record.
So now he begins to crack.
He begins to crack. His knee is worn down. He gets a hip pointer. But more than that, it's this bearing down of expectations, the matchmaking, you know? They beat Georgetown in the first game. Pete has a lackluster game. They beat Oklahoma, and then they're paired against Marquette, which the only reason they were in the NIT in the first place is that Al McGuire got upset, and he pulled his team out of the NCAA. That's how big the NIT was at the time. He didn't like their seeding. He didn't like where they put them. Marquette had Dean Memminger, had some real, from Harlem, had some really good players, really good defensive players. And basically, they shut Pete down. They shut Pete down. Of course, it didn't help that Pete had been getting drunk as hell all week and went into that game with a terrible hangover. And it was really, looking back to my mind, a very willful act of self-destruction. It was Pete's way of begging out. And when it's over, he's sitting in the Knicks training room in Madison Square Garden in a hot tub with the team trainer, with the LSU trainer, Billy Simmons. And he sees Walt Clyde Frazier in the locker room. Frazier comes up to him. Billy Simmons remembers this. He says, I got something for you when you come up to the pros. Mm-hmm. Pete's sitting in the tub. He goes, yeah, what's that? He goes, defense. Clyde
Not that
exits.
68-point game.
Clyde exits. Bradley, who's playing for the Knicks, comes over now. He goes, they want you, man. They're ready for you. And it's a very interesting exchange. It's very clear in Simmons' mind. It's really like one great white hope talking to another. And it's a title that neither man, bargained for. But it came with its own, again, oppressive set of expectations. And it followed Pete throughout the rest of his career.
What was Press's response in New York to Pete's performance? How did he respond to that performance?
Press was crestfallen. He thought that New York never got to see the real Pete, that the basketball gods never really got to see the real Pete. And he was so eager. This was in Press's mind, this was still Claire B's home. But I think Press was crestfallen. In the last game, which is against Army, coached by Bobby Knight, Pete sits out injured. And he asks a teammate, he goes, listen, when they go out, when we go out to be introduced, can you walk out with me? And the guy, Russ, says, why do you want me to walk out with you? He says, well, these people from New York, they paid a lot of money to see me play, and they're really going to boo the hell out of me. And they did.
Mm-hmm. He was awkward in these circumstances.
He was socially awkward. As graceful and as magical as he could be on the court in the flash of a moment. He could be awkward socially. He'd turn his eyes away, and he had already begun to use alcohol to break the ice, to relieve the pressure, to escape. I don't know if you characterize him as an alcoholic or what, but he was already binge drinking.
So he leaves New York, not performing to expectations.
Well, while he's in the NIT, they're already negotiating his pro contract. Mm-hmm. And basically what it comes down to, the Atlanta Hawks or the Carolina Cougars of the ABA. I think that they were both offering what at the time could be considered outrageously lucrative deals. And Carolina was dangling, the possibility of a movie contract and hamburger franchises. But I think that ultimately...
And back to North Carolina.
But ultimately, Press wanted Pete to go to the established league, not the ABA, he wanted Pete to go to the NBA. He wanted Pete to go play in the league of Jerry West, of Oscar Roberts.
Even though the ABA was probably suited more for his game.
Yes.
At that time.
Yeah. He wanted Pete to play in the established league. He saw, I think that, he didn't want his revolutionary player going to the Revolutionary League. He wanted his revolutionary player going to the established league. He wanted his revolutionary player revolutionizing the established league.
And this was another demonstration of the influence of press over Pete, where Pete...
Basically, I think that's what it comes down to.
And where Pete might have said, I would have liked to play in the ABA.
Pete was still an extension of press. He had his moments of rebellion, and they had their moments of conflict, certainly. But he was still press's creation, and he thought of himself like that too.
The decision is made for him to go to Atlanta for the largest contract to be paid to a player at that point in the NBA.
Advertised as $1.9 or $2 million. In fact, it's 1.5 with a condo, with a country club membership, with a car, with $50 a month for gas, which was actually a lot of money back then, and a phone in the car, which my favorite.
Had to be
my favorite piece of the contract. It was, the greatest contract in sports at that time for a brief moment, but it also sets Pete apart as a target. What you start to see now is this is another telling of the Elvis myth in a certain way. He's the great white hope. And, he's almost more analogous to a pop music sensation. Someone like him comes along once every generation, whether it's Elvis or Chet Baker or Eminem. He is seen as the white guy performing in a predominantly black form. And he's being sold as that. And that comes with enormous pressures in itself. And it engenders enormous resentment. I don't think that there was a worse place for him to go than to the Atlanta Hawks in 1970. Everyone went against type. You had a basketball team struggling to survive in the Deep South, in football country, okay? They were playing in Georgia Tech's Fieldhouse, which held about 7,900, okay? They were a very good team. The only thing wrong with the Atlanta Hawks is that they couldn't get by the Lakers of Jerry West and Wilt Chamberlain and Elgin Baylor. Other than that, they were a great team. But Pete needed a running team. The Hawks were a predominantly black team. I think 7 of their first 8 players were black. They were also a slow down team. They liked to slow the ball down, set up the offense. That made life difficult for Pete. The money Pete was making made life difficult for Pete. I mean, there was an extraordinary guard, Joe Caldwell, one of the best defenders in the league, an extraordinary player, one of the most complete guards in the game at that time. He was making peanuts, and all of a sudden, here comes Pete. Why is Pete making that much money? Because he's white? Because he's good on television? Because people want to see him? Try explaining that to Joe Caldwell.
You couldn't.
You couldn't. And the coach, Richie Guerin, understood that. So, Caldwell leaves, goes to the ABA, and, the resentments just feed upon themselves. And Pete, as any rookie, no matter how talented, has problems adjusting. Just like when he was a freshman in college, he's having the same problems in practice as a rookie in the pros. All of his passes, they're bouncing off guys' chests, bouncing off guys' arms, guys' shoulders. No one's accustomed to seeing these passes. Except the difference is his daddy's not here to protect him anymore. He's by himself.